Echoes of the Lighthouse. Chapter 1. The Arrival. The small town of Windmere sat quietly on the edge of the sea. It was a peaceful place with narrow streets, old houses, and friendly people. The waves crashed gently against the rocks, and the sky often wore a soft gray color. In the distance, on a lonely cliff, stood the old lighthouse. It was tall and silent, covered in mist and forgotten by time. The lighthouse had not worked for many years. Its light was gone, and its walls were cracked. People in Windmere said it was haunted. They told stories about strange sounds, cold winds, and shadows that moved without reason. But most people stayed away. They were afraid of what they could not explain. One day, a young woman named Mira arrived in Windmere. She came by train, carrying a small suitcase, a notebook, and a camera. Mira was a historian. She studied old buildings and places that people had forgotten. She loved learning about the past and finding stories hidden in quiet corners. Mira was not like most people. She enjoyed silence. She liked walking alone and listening to the wind. She believed that every place had a memory, and she wanted to understand it. Mira had read about the lighthouse in an old book. The book said the lighthouse was once very important. It had helped ships find their way during storms. It had saved lives. But after a terrible storm many years ago, the light went out, and the building was left alone. No one wanted to fix it. No one wanted to remember. That made Mira curious. She wanted to know what had happened. She wanted to hear the stories that were still hiding inside the walls. When Mira arrived in Windmere, she asked the townspeople about the lighthouse. Some people looked away. Others told her to stay far from it. They said it was a place of sadness. They said strange things happened there. But Mira was not afraid. She had visited many places with dark histories. She believed that truth was more powerful than fear. She thanked the people and walked toward the cliff. The path to the lighthouse was quiet. The wind was strong, and the air was cold. Mira pulled her coat tighter and kept walking. The sea below was dark and deep. The lighthouse stood tall above the rocks. Its windows were broken, and its door was old. But it still looked proud, like it was waiting for someone to return. Mira stopped for a moment and looked up. She felt something in the air. It was not danger. It was something else. Something watching her. Something waiting. She opened the door and stepped inside. The floor creaked under her feet. The air smelled like salt and dust. The walls were covered in old paint and spiderwebs. Mira took out her notebook and began to write. She looked around slowly, taking pictures and notes. She felt calm, but also curious. The lighthouse was quiet, but not empty. It felt like a place full of memories. Mira knew she had found something special. She didn't know what would happen next, but she was ready to listen. She was ready to learn the truth hidden in the echoes of the lighthouse. Chapter 2. The First Night. Mira decided to stay in the lighthouse for a few nights. She wanted to understand the place better. She believed that staying inside would help her feel its history. She packed a small bag with food, warm blankets, a notebook, and a small lamp. She also brought extra batteries and a thermos of tea. The lighthouse was cold and quiet, so she needed to be prepared. Mira was used to working alone in old buildings. She had stayed in empty houses and forgotten schools before. But this lighthouse felt different. It was not just empty. It felt alive. She arrived before sunset. The sky was orange and pink, and the sea below was calm. Mira climbed the stairs slowly. Each step made a soft sound. The walls were old, and the paint was peeling. She found a small room near the top. It had a broken chair, a dusty table, and a window facing the sea. She cleaned the space a little and placed her things on the table. She set up her lamp and opened her notebook. She wrote about the building, the view, and her feelings. She felt calm but curious. Something in the air made her heart beat faster. As night came, the wind outside grew stronger. The lighthouse creaked and groaned. Mira sat near the window, drinking tea and listening. At first, everything was quiet. Then she heard something. It was soft, like footsteps on old wood. She looked around, but saw nothing. The sound came again, closer this time. Then she heard whispers. They were quiet and hard to understand. Mira didn't move. She didn't feel afraid. The voices were not angry. They were sad, like someone remembering something painful. She saw shadows moving on the walls. They were slow and gentle. One shadow looked like a person standing near the stairs. Another looked like someone holding a lantern. Mira watched them carefully. She didn't speak. She didn't run. She listened. She felt that the lighthouse was trying to tell her something. It was not just a building. It was a place full of memories. It had seen storms, people, and silence. It had kept secrets for many years. Mira opened her notebook and began to write. She wrote about the sounds, the shadows, and the feeling in the air. She wrote about the sadness in the voices. She wanted to understand who they were. She believed they were spirits of the past. Maybe they were lighthouse keepers. Maybe they were people who had lived nearby. She didn't know yet, but she wanted to learn. She felt a strong connection to the place. It was like the lighthouse had chosen her to listen. The night passed slowly. Mira stayed awake for many hours. She watched the shadows and listened to the whispers. She didn't feel alone. She felt surrounded by stories. She felt like the lighthouse was alive with memories. When the morning light came through the window, the sounds stopped. The shadows faded. The air felt lighter. Mira closed her notebook and smiled. She knew she had found something special. She didn't understand everything yet, but she was ready to stay and learn more. The lighthouse had opened its heart to her, and she was ready to listen. Chapter 3. The Watchers. On the second night, the wind around the lighthouse was stronger. The sky was dark, and the sea below moved with slow, heavy waves. Mira stayed inside the lighthouse, sitting near the window with her notebook and lamp. She had written many pages already, but she felt there was more to learn. The building was quiet, but not empty. She could feel something in the air, like a soft presence watching her. She was not afraid. She was ready to listen again. As the night grew deeper, Mira saw a figure near the old stairs. The figure was tall and still. It was a man wearing a long coat. His face was pale, and his eyes looked far away. He stood without moving, looking out toward the sea. Mira watched him carefully. She didn't speak or move. She felt calm, not scared. She understood that he was a spirit. He was not there to harm her. He was part of the lighthouse, part of its memory. The man stayed near the stairs for a long time. Mira felt that he had once worked in the lighthouse. Maybe he had watched the sea every night, waiting for ships. Maybe he had sent signals to help sailors find their way. His coat looked old, and his boots were worn. He seemed tired, but strong. Mira felt his sadness. She felt that he had lost something important. She wanted to know his story. Later that night, Mira saw two more figures. One was a woman holding a lantern. Her dress was long, and her hair was tied back. She walked slowly across the room, her light glowing softly. The other figure was a boy sitting near the wall. He held a book in his hands and looked down at the pages. He was young, maybe 12 or 13. His face was quiet, and his eyes were full of thought. Mira didn't hear their voices, but she felt their emotions. The woman felt worried. The boy felt lonely. They didn't speak, but their presence was strong. Mira understood that they were lighthouse keepers from the past. Each one had lived in the lighthouse during different times. Each one had watched the sea, cared for the light, and waited through long nights. They had stayed in the lighthouse to protect ships and lives. They had worked in silence, with hope and fear. But something had happened. Their stories were unfinished. Their memories were still inside the building, waiting to be heard. Mira wrote everything in her notebook. She described the man, the woman, and the boy. She wrote about their clothes, their faces, and their feelings. She didn't know their names, but she felt close to them. She felt that they wanted to be remembered. They wanted someone to understand their pain. Mira knew she had to help them. She didn't know how yet, but she was sure that her work was important. The lighthouse was more than a place. It was a home for forgotten souls. And she was there to listen. The night passed slowly. The spirits stayed near her, quiet and calm. Mira didn't sleep much. She watched the shadows and listened to the silence. She felt a deep connection to the lighthouse and its watchers. She knew that her journey had just begun. The stories were waiting, and she was ready to find them. Chapter 4. The Secrets Revealed. Mira woke early the next morning. The lighthouse was quiet, and the sea outside was calm. The wind was softer than before. She felt rested but thoughtful. The shadows and whispers from the night stayed in her mind. She wanted to understand more. She wanted to know who the spirits were and why they had stayed in the lighthouse for so long. She believed their stories were important. She believed they had something to say. She walked into town with her notebook in her bag. The streets of Windmere were peaceful. People greeted her kindly, but some looked curious. Mira went to the town library. It was a small building with wooden shelves and dusty books. The librarian was an old man with glasses and a quiet smile. Mira asked to see old records about the lighthouse. He led her to a corner filled with boxes and papers. She sat down and began to read. She found maps of the coast, drawings of the lighthouse, and letters written many years ago. Some letters were from lighthouse keepers. They spoke about storms, long nights, and the fear of failure. One letter was from a man named Elias, who had worked in the lighthouse during a terrible storm. He wrote that he had seen a ship in danger and tried to send a warning. He had lit the signal, but the town did not respond. The ship crashed, and many people died. The town blamed the keepers. They said the warning was too late. The lighthouse was closed, and the keepers were forgotten. Mira felt sadness as she read the letters. The keepers had tried to help. They had done their best. But no one listened. Their names were not remembered. Their stories were lost. Mira copied the letters and took pictures of the maps. She wanted to bring the truth back to the lighthouse. She wanted the spirits to know that someone believed them. She returned to the lighthouse before sunset. The sky was gray, and the air was cool. She climbed the stairs and went to the small room near the top. She placed the letters and maps on the table. She lit her lamp and sat quietly. She didn't speak. She waited. That night, the spirits came again. Mira saw the man in the long coat near the stairs. He looked at the table and then at Mira. His face was softer. The woman with the lantern walked slowly across the room. The boy with the book sat near the wall. The air felt warmer. The shadows moved gently. Mira felt their sadness begin to change. It was still there, but it was lighter. It was not heavy anymore. Mira felt peace in the room. She knew the spirits had seen the letters. They had felt her care. She had given them a voice. She had told their truth. The lighthouse was no longer just a place of silence. It was a place of memory. It was a place where the past could speak. Mira wrote in her notebook. She described the change in the air, the feeling of peace, and the quiet presence of the watchers. She didn't know what would happen next, but she felt something important had happened. The lighthouse had shared its secret. The spirits had been heard. And Mira had become part of their story. Chapter 5. The Visitor. A few days after Mira placed the letters on the table, a man named Elias arrived in Windmere. He was tall and quiet, with strong hands and tired eyes. He wore a dark coat and carried a small bag. Elias was a sailor. He had worked on ships for many years, traveling across oceans and visiting many ports. But Windmere was different. It was not just another town. It was the place where he had lost someone very important, his father. Many years ago, during a terrible storm, Elias's father had died near the lighthouse. He had been one of the keepers. Elias was only a boy at the time. He remembered the night clearly. The wind was loud, the sea was wild, and the sky was full of lightning. A ship had crashed near the rocks. People said the lighthouse had failed. They said the keepers had not done their job. Elias believed those words. He grew up thinking his father had made a mistake. That thought stayed with him for many years. But one day, Elias heard about Mira's work. A friend in town told him that a historian was staying at the lighthouse. She had found old letters and maps. She was writing about the past. Elias felt something inside him. He didn't know what it was, but he knew he had to go. He packed his bag and traveled to Windmere. He walked through the quiet streets and up the path to the lighthouse. The air was cool, and the sky was cloudy. The building looked old, but strong. When Elias entered the lighthouse, he felt something change inside him. The air was different. It was quiet, but full of feeling. He walked slowly up the stairs. He saw the room where Mira had placed the letters. The papers were still on the table. He looked at them and read the words. He saw his father's name. He saw the truth. His father had tried to warn the town. He had lit the signal. He had done everything he could. But no one had listened. Elias felt tears in his eyes. He cried quietly, standing near the window. Then something happened. Elias saw a figure near the wall. It was a man in a long coat. His face was calm. His eyes were kind. Elias knew it was his father. The spirit did not speak, but Elias felt his presence. He felt love, sadness, and peace. He understood everything now. His father had not failed. He had been brave. He had tried to save lives. Elias forgave him. He let go of the pain he had carried for so long. Elias stayed in the lighthouse for a few hours. He walked through the rooms and looked at the sea. He felt close to his father. He felt close to the other keepers. He thanked Mira for her work. He told her that she had helped him find peace. He promised to tell others the truth. He said the lighthouse should be remembered with respect. It was not a place of fear. It was a place of memory. When Elias left Windmere, he felt lighter. He carried the story of the lighthouse in his heart. He knew that the past could hurt, but it could also heal. The lighthouse stood tall on the cliff, no longer silent. It had spoken through Mira, through the letters, and through the spirits. It had become a place where truth lived. And Elias was ready to share that truth with the world. Chapter 6. A New Light. Mira stayed in Windmere for a few more weeks. She did not rush her work. She wanted to spend more time with the lighthouse and the town. Every morning, she walked up the path to the cliff. The wind was cold, but she liked the feeling. It helped her think. The lighthouse still stood tall, quiet and strong. It was no longer just a building to her. It was a place full of voices, memories, and truth. She began to clean the lighthouse slowly. She swept the floors, wiped the windows, and cleared the dust from the old furniture. She found broken tools, old books, and pieces of glass. She placed everything carefully in boxes. She wanted to protect the history. She didn't throw anything away. Every object had a story. She worked with care and respect. Sometimes, she felt the spirits near her. They didn't speak, but she felt their presence. It was soft and peaceful. Mira also started writing a book. She used her notes, letters, and maps. She wrote about the lighthouse, the storm, and the keepers. She wrote about the sadness and the truth. Her words were simple but full of feeling. She wanted people to understand what had happened. She wanted the keepers to be remembered with kindness. She wrote about Elias and his visit. She wrote about the change in the air. She wrote about the light that returned to the lighthouse, not from machines, but from memory. People in Windmere heard about Mira's work. They became curious. Some of them had never visited the lighthouse before. Now they wanted to see it. They walked up the path and entered the building. They looked at the old walls and the quiet rooms. They brought flowers and candles. They placed them near the stairs and windows. They stood in silence and remembered. Some people cried. Others smiled. They felt close to the past. They felt the truth in the air. The lighthouse was still quiet, but it felt alive. It was no longer a place of fear. It was a place of peace. Mira wanted to do one last thing before she left. She carried a small lantern to the top of the lighthouse. It was not big or bright, but it glowed gently. She placed it near the old light, where the keepers had once worked. The lantern was a symbol. It was a light for the past, for the truth, and for the future. At night, the lantern shone softly across the sea. It was not strong enough to guide ships, but it was strong enough to guide hearts. Mira stood at the top and looked out at the water. She felt calm. She had come to study a building, but she had found something deeper. She had found a story that needed to be heard. She had listened to forgotten voices. She had shared their truth. She had helped the town remember. She had helped the spirits rest. When Mira left Windmere, she carried her book, her notes, and her memories. Her heart was full. She knew she would never forget the lighthouse. She knew she would tell its story to others. The past was not gone. It was alive in the light, in the wind, and in the people who remembered. Moral: the past is never truly gone. When we listen to forgotten voices, we find truth and healing. Even places filled with sadness can become symbols of hope. Sharing stories brings peace to the living and the lost. Thank you for your attention. If you like the story, please like and subscribe. It motivates us to make new videos and helps us promote the channel. Thank you.